My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how my life fell apart, only to be rebuilt in a way I never thought possible. It all started with what I thought was just a lingering cold. I've been feeling weak, tired, and constantly out of breath. At first, I brushed it off, blaming stress and long work hours. But when I collapsed in my office one afternoon, my wife, Anna, insisted I see a doctor. I didn't expect much from the visit. Maybe a prescription for vitamins or rest. Instead, I was admitted for tests, and within hours, my world came crashing down. The doctor sat across from me, her face grave. "Daniel," she began, "I'm afraid we have some difficult news. The tests revealed a serious condition. It's aggressive, and we need to prepare for the worst." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stared at her, hoping I'd misunderstood. "What does that mean?" I managed to ask. She sighed. "It means that your condition is advanced. Treatments may slow it down, but there's no cure." "I'm so sorry." "No cure." Those words echoed in my head as Anna clutched my hand. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't face the fear in her eyes. The same fear I felt choking me. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, scans, and medications. Every night, I lay in that cold hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. I tried to put on a brave face for Anna and our son Liam, but inside, I was breaking. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving them. Liam was only 10. He still needed his father. And Anna, how could I abandon her after everything we'd built together? One evening, Anna sat beside me, her voice trembling. "Daniel, we have to keep believing. Miracles happen every day." I almost laughed. Miracles? I'd stopped believing in those years ago. After my father died, suddenly when I was a teenager, I turned my back on faith. What kind of God would let good people suffer? But looking at Anna, I couldn't bring myself to crush her hope. "I'll try," I said. It was a lie, but it seemed to comfort her. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the darkened ceiling. I felt empty, like my soul had already left my body. I wanted to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I whispered into the darkness, "If you're there, if you're real, show me." Tears ran down my face as I waited for an answer. None came. The next day, my condition worsened. The doctor said my body was no longer responding to treatment. They suggested preparing for hospice care. Anna broke down, but I felt numb. I spent the afternoon staring out the hospital window, watching the sun set. It felt like my last one. Later that night, as the hospital grew quiet, something strange happened. I woke suddenly, feeling an overwhelming warmth in the room. It wasn't the sterile, artificial heat of the hospital. It was something deeper, something alive. When I opened my eyes, I saw it. A soft, glowing light filled the room, and in the center of it stood a figure. He was radiant, yet I wasn't afraid. Instead, peace washed over me. He stepped closer, and I saw his face, kind, compassionate, and full of love. "Do not be afraid," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated inside me, as if it had touched my very soul. Who are you?" I whispered, even though I already knew. "I am here to heal you," he said. "But you must believe." I couldn't speak. My heart raced, but not with fear, with hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Then he reached out and touched my forehead. A surge of warmth flooded through my body, and I felt whole. The pain, the weakness, they were gone. When I opened my eyes again, the light was gone. I was alone, but I knew what I had seen. I sat up in bed, testing my strength. It felt impossible, but I could breathe easily. My limbs felt strong. Was it real? Or had I imagined it in my desperation? I pressed the call button, and a nurse rushed in. Her eyes widened when she saw me sitting up. "Mr. Carter, are you okay?" I think I'm better," I said. She immediately called the doctor, who ordered more tests. As they wheeled me away for scans, Anna arrived. She froze when she saw me awake and alert. "Daniel," she said, her voice breaking. I reached for her hand, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. "I think something just happened," I said. "Something I can't explain." The test that followed shocked everyone. My condition had improved drastically overnight. The doctors were baffled. But I knew. I couldn't explain it scientifically, but I didn't need to. I had asked for a sign, and I had received one. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a different prayer. Thank you. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Waking up the next morning, I still wasn't sure if what had happened was real. The warmth, the voice, the light, it all felt like a dream. But when I swung my legs over the side of the hospital bed and stood up without wobbling, I knew it wasn't. Anna was asleep in the chair beside me, her face drawn with exhaustion. She had been my rock through all of this, and yet I had seen how much the weight of my illness had broken her. I reached out and touched her hand. Anna, I whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw me standing, she bolted upright. Daniel? Her voice was a mix of shock and disbelief. I'm okay, I said softly, squeezing her fingers. No, you can't be. She stumbled to her feet, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at me. Daniel, you were dying. I nodded. I know, but something happened. Her tears turned into sobs, and she threw her arms around me. I prayed for this. I prayed every single night for this. I held her close, letting her cry, but part of me still felt uneasy. What if this was temporary? What if the illness came back? The doctors ordered more tests, and I spent the rest of the day being poked, prodded, and scanned. Each result came back the same, clear. My organs were functioning normally, and there was no sign of the disease that had nearly taken my life. The medical staff didn't know what to make of it. This doesn't happen, my oncologist said, flipping through the test results again. These scans are completely different from the ones we did 2 days ago. There's no logical explanation. Maybe it's not logical, I said quietly. The doctor looked up at me, her eyebrows raised. What do you mean? I hesitated, unsure how much to say. I saw something, or someone. Her expression shifted. I could tell she wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to hallucinations or wishful thinking. I understand how illness can affect the mind, she began cautiously. No, I interrupted. This wasn't in my mind. I know what I saw, and I know how I feel now. Anna squeezed my hand. Doctor, he's not imagining this. Look at the evidence. The doctor sighed and leaned back. Medically, we can't explain it. But whatever happened, it's clear that Daniel is no longer in danger. That night, I was discharged from the hospital. It felt strange walking out of the place I thought would be my final home. When we got back to our house, Liam ran to the door. Dad, he shouted, his small arms wrapping around my waist. Hey, buddy, I said, lifting him off the ground and spinning him around, something I hadn't been able to do for months. He giggled, then pulled back to look at me. Are you better now? I nodded. I think so. Liam's eyes lit up. I prayed for you every night. His words hit me harder than I expected. I knelt in front of him. You did? He nodded earnestly. I asked Jesus to make you better. I swallowed the lump in my throat and hugged him tightly. Over the next few days, news of my sudden recovery spread through our family and friends. Some were amazed, while others were skeptical. Maybe it was just a misdiagnosis, one friend suggested. I don't care what the doctors say, another added. This is a miracle, but not everyone was convinced. My brother, Michael, cornered me during a family gathering. Come on, Daniel, he said. You don't really believe this was divine intervention, do you? What else could it be? I asked. He shook his head. Coincidence? A medical anomaly? You've never been religious before. Why start now? I didn't have an answer for him. Not one he would accept, anyway. That night, as I lay in bed beside Anna, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I'd seen. Do you think it was really him? I asked softly. Anna turned to face me. Who else could it have been? I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding. But why me? Why now? Anna took my hand. Maybe it's not about why. Maybe it's about what you're supposed to do next. Her words stayed with me. Was there a reason I had been given this second chance? I decided to go back to the hospital to visit patients who were still fighting their battles. Walking through those halls felt different this time. Instead of dread, I felt hope. I stopped in one room where a young woman was lying in bed, her head covered with a scarf. She looked pale, and her eyes were tired, but she smiled when I walked in. "Hi," I said. "I just wanted to share something with you." She tilted her head. "What's that?" So I told her my story, the fear, the despair, and the moment when everything changed. By the time I finished, her eyes were filled with tears. "Do you really think he listens?" she asked. I nodded. "I know he does." That night, I prayed again, not for answers this time, but for strength to share what had happened and to give others the same hope I had been given. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey wasn't over yet. The days following my hospital discharge felt surreal. It wasn't just the physical recovery that amazed me. It was the overwhelming sense of peace that had settled over my heart. But that peace didn't last long. The more I thought about what had happened, the more questions began to pile up. One evening, Anna and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Liam was playing with his toy cars on the steps. "Anna," I said, breaking the silence. "I can't stop thinking about it." She turned to me, her eyes soft but curious. "About what?" "The vision. The light. Everything." She nodded slowly. "I know. It's a lot to process." I ran a hand through my hair, struggling to find the right words. What if there's more to this? What if I'm supposed to do something with this second chance? Anna reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Maybe you are, but you don't have to figure it all out right now." Her words comforted me, but that restless feeling didn't go away. The next day, I decided to visit the church we hadn't stepped foot in since our wedding. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I felt drawn there like I needed answers that no one else could give me. The sanctuary was quiet when I entered. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the walls with colors that felt alive. I sat in the back pew, my hands clasped together, and whispered, "God, if this is you, if you really save me, show me what I'm supposed to do." Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing happened. I felt foolish for expecting some dramatic sign. With a heavy sigh, I stood up and turned to leave, only to bump into someone I hadn't seen in years. "Pastor Mark?" He looked at me, his eyes widening in recognition. "Daniel, is that you?" I nodded, and he reached out to shake my hand. "I can't believe it. Last I heard, you were—" He hesitated. "Dying." I finished for him. He nodded slowly. "But you're here, alive." "It's a long story," I said. He smiled. "I got time?" We sat down, and I told him everything, from the diagnosis to the vision to my sudden recovery. He listened without interrupting, his expression calm but thoughtful. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "You know, Daniel, stories like yours aren't accidents. They're testimonies." "Testimonies?" He nodded. "God works through people. Sometimes he gives us miracles, not just to save us, but to inspire others. Maybe that's why you're still here." His words stuck with me as I left the church. Could that really be it? Was I supposed to share my story? Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the pastor's words in my head. Finally, I grabbed my phone and opened a social media app. I stared at the blank screen for a long time before typing. 2 weeks ago, I was dying. The doctor said I didn't have much time left. But something happened, something I can't explain. I want to share my story with you because I believe it might give someone else hope. I hit post before I could talk myself out of it. By morning, the post had exploded. Hundreds of comments poured in, some praising God, others questioning if I was making it up. One comment stood out. "I'm losing hope. My mom is in the hospital, and the doctors say there's nothing they can do. I need to believe miracles are real. Please tell me more." I couldn't ignore it. I replied and offered to talk to them privately. That conversation turned into dozens more. People started reaching out, asking for prayers, for advice, and for encouragement. At first, I felt overwhelmed. Who was I to give anyone advice about faith? I was still figuring things out myself. But every time I doubted, I remembered the light and the voice that had saved me. One evening, I sat down with Anna and showed her the messages. "Do you think this is it?" I asked. "Is this what I'm supposed to do?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. "I think it's exactly what you're supposed to do." From that moment on, I stopped questioning and started sharing. But the more I opened up, the more I realized how broken people were, how many were searching for hope and healing. And with each story I heard, I felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. One night, as I lay in bed, I prayed again. God, I don't know if I'm doing this right, but if this is your plan, keep showing me the way. I didn't expect an answer, but the next day, something unexpected happened. A local news station contacted me. They wanted to do a story about my recovery. Anna was nervous. Are you sure about this? I think I have to, I said. The interview aired the following week, and the response was overwhelming. People started recognizing me in public, asking me to pray for them, and sharing their own stories of faith. But not everyone was supportive. My brother, Michael, pulled me aside after the segment aired. "This is too much, Daniel," he said. "You're turning this into a spectacle." "It's not a spectacle," I shot back. "It's my story." He shook his head. "What if you're wrong? What if this was just luck, and you're giving people false hope?" His words hit hard, but I stood my ground. I know what I saw, and I know I didn't survive this for no reason. Michael didn't argue further, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Later that night, I stood on the porch, looking up at the stars. I didn't have all the answers. I still didn't fully understand why this had happened to me. But one thing was clear: I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. The days following the interview were a whirlwind. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages and notifications. Strangers were reaching out, sharing their struggles, and asking for prayers. It felt overwhelming, but also deeply fulfilling. I started to believe that this was my purpose, to give people hope and remind them that miracles still happen. But not everyone saw it that way. One evening, as Anna and I were clearing the dinner table, she hesitated before speaking. "Daniel," she said softly, "are you sure you're ready for this kind of attention?" I looked up startled. "What do you mean?" "This ministry, or whatever it's turning into. It's wonderful, but it's also a lot of pressure. You're carrying so many people's hopes right now." I set down the plate I was holding. "I know it's a lot, Anna, but I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. God didn't save me just so I could go back to my old life." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "Are you worried I'll let them down?" I asked. "I'm worried about you," she admitted. "What if you can't answer all their questions? What if someone doesn't get the miracle they're hoping for? Will you blame yourself?" Her words lingered with me long after we finished cleaning up. Later that night, as I scrolled through messages, one in particular caught my attention. "My dad is in hospice care. We've prayed and prayed, but nothing's changing. How do you keep believing when it feels like God isn't listening?" I froze, staring at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. How could I answer that? What if God didn't heal their dad? What if their prayers went unanswered? Doubt crept in, and for the first time since my recovery, I felt it sink its claws into me. I set my phone down and walked outside, needing air. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like tiny beacons of light. I stared up, searching for answers. "God," I whispered, "what am I supposed to tell them? What am I supposed to do when their prayers aren't answered the way mine was?" The silence felt heavy. I sat on the porch steps, head in my hands, feeling more lost than I had in weeks. That's when my phone buzzed again. It was another message, but this one was different. "I watched your interview, and I just wanted to say thank you. I've been struggling with my faith for years, but hearing your story gave me hope again. I don't know what's next, but I'm ready to trust God a little more." I read it 3 times before it really sank in. Maybe it wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it was about showing people they weren't alone in their doubts and fears. I went back inside and sat down with Anna. "I can't promise I'll always say the right thing," I told her. "But I can listen, and I can remind people that God's still here, even when it doesn't feel like it." Her eyes softened. "That's all anyone really needs, Daniel." The next day, I responded to the message about the man's dad. I wish I had an easy answer, but I don't. What I do know is that God hasn't left you, even if it feels that way. Sometimes miracles look different than we expect. "I'm here if you need someone to talk to." The reply came quickly. "Thank you. That means more than you know." I started leaning into those conversations, not trying to fix everything, but just being present. And the more I opened up about my own struggles with doubt, the more people seemed to connect. But then something happened that shook me again. I received a letter in the mail. It had no return address, but inside was a single page with a typed message. "Stop lying to people. Miracles aren't real. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Who sent this? Was it someone I knew? Or just a stranger who'd seen my story? I showed it to Anna, and her face went pale. Do you think it's a threat? I don't know, I admitted. We decided to report it to the police, just to be safe. But even after filing the report, I couldn't shake the fear it left behind. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing. Was I doing the right thing? Or was I just fooling myself? And everyone else? I got up and went to the living room, dropping to my knees. God, I need you, I prayed. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I sat there for what felt like hours, and eventually, a sense of peace washed over me. Not an answer, just peace. When I finally went back to bed, I realized something. Doubt wasn't the enemy. It was part of the journey. And maybe, just maybe, sharing those doubts made my faith even stronger. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The fear and doubt from the night before hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer felt like chains holding me down. Instead, they felt more like shadows, present but powerless in the light. Anna was already awake, sipping coffee at the kitchen table. She looked up when I walked in. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I sat down across from her. "Better," I said honestly. "Still figuring things out, but better." She smiled. "I knew you'd get there." I reached for her hand, and she squeezed mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt grounded, like maybe, just maybe, we were on the right path after all. But the peace didn't last long. Later that afternoon, I got another letter. This time it wasn't typed. It was handwritten, and the words felt heavier somehow. "You're leading people astray. Stop before it's too late." I stared at it, my stomach twisting into knots. "What does it mean?" Anna asked, reading over my shoulder. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's definitely not random." We reported it again, but there wasn't much the police could do without more information. Still, I couldn't let it go. I prayed about it that night, asking God for clarity. The next morning, I woke up with a conviction I couldn't explain. I decided to share the letters publicly. I recorded a short video and posted it online. I wanted to be honest with you all about something that's been happening. I've been receiving letters telling me to stop sharing my story. At first, I let fear and doubt creep in. But I realized something. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us who've ever felt afraid to share our faith or to believe in miracles. I'm not going to stop, and I want to thank every single one of you who stood by me and shared your own stories of hope. We're in this together. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in, not just from supporters, but from people who admitted they'd been afraid to speak up about their own experiences. I thought I was the only one. Your story gave me the courage to share mine. Don't let the darkness win. The messages gave me strength, but they also reminded me why I'd started this journey in the first place. I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here to be a light. A week later, something incredible happened. I received an email from the person who'd sent the letters. "I'm sorry," it began. "I didn't mean to scare you. I lost someone I loved, and no matter how much I prayed, God didn't save them. Seeing your story felt like a slap in the face. But after watching your latest video, I realized I was wrong. I don't know if I believe in miracles yet, but I'm willing to try." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read it. I showed it to Anna, and she hugged me tightly. "See?" she whispered. "Even the ones who doubt need to hear this." That moment changed everything for me. It wasn't about convincing people that miracles were real. It was about giving them the courage to believe that hope was possible. From then on, I focused less on the attention and more on the impact. I started hosting live prayer sessions online, and the community grew faster than I ever imagined. People were sharing testimonies, lifting each other up, and reminding me every single day why I had to keep going. One night, as I closed out a live stream, Anna came into the room. "You're glowing," she said with a smile. I laughed. "I think that's just the ring light." "No," she said, stepping closer. "It's you. You're finally walking in your purpose." Her words stuck with me. For the first time in years, I felt whole. But I also knew the journey wasn't over. Faith wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice. And as long as there were people out there searching for hope, I'd be there to remind them they weren't alone.